the Bank of England should get ready for aliens.
What other things are they preparing for? If that's number one on the list, I would say there's probably some more pressing issues.
The Bank of England is duty bound to prepare for these kind of situations.
If oil was suddenly pointless and an entire global industry and supply chain was changed, there would be a short-term shock around that, no doubt about it.
There's a really interesting reason why Star Trek gets referred to as luxury space communism. If energy becomes without cost all of a sudden, it essentially devalues all of the assumptions underpinning a capitalist economy, because suddenly everything becomes infinitely abundant.
Who is it who's scenario planning this at the Bank of England, and what's the process, and what's the plan? Is there a plan?
You could see a situation where the entire market is selling out of one asset and trying to crowd into another. You could instantly devalue an enormous portion of the global economy and just create a whole series of overnight winners.
Would it create panic? Is that, we're talking more about alien discovery here than finance, but
I don't think people are going to be chill about it, Chris.
If around every corner there's something that's going to wipe us out, then you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning, right?
Now, here's where I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on, Chris. What if they've already done it, but it's too top secret to tell us? One of the more profound discussions that we've ever had on the podcast.
The truth is out there, Edmund.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mouthy Money podcast. My name is Edmund Greaves, and I am the editor of Mouthy Money. And I am joined, as ever, by my good co-host, Chris Tuite, who is head of consumer finance at communications consultancy MRM. Chris, good afternoon. Hello.
Hi, Ed. How you doing?
Very well, thank you. More the better for the topic that we have today, which I think, in all seriousness, might be perhaps one of the more profound discussions that we've ever had on the podcast.
The truth is out there, Ed, and we'll get there in the next half an hour.
He went straight there with the UFO jokes. I'm very disappointed, Chris, because I'm trying to treat this in all the seriousness it deserves.
Listen, I've read your piece. I know how seriously you take it. Maybe you want to outline for the listeners what it is we're here to discuss.
For listeners who want a bit of a written primer, I have written an article on the Mouthy Money website by the time this has been published about what we are about to discuss. And what we are going to discuss is whether or not the Bank of England should get ready for aliens. I'm going to let that soak in for a second there. And I think we're going to try
Hang on a second, Ed. How do we know there aren't any there already?
We don't. And that's part of the discussion.
Okay.
So, Let me explain why we're discussing this a little bit. Now, this isn't just something that's come randomly to my head, and I'm not a sort of mad conspiracy theorist. I don't spend my time thinking about aliens. It's not something at the top of my mind. Generally speaking, I'm more worried about things like inflation, frankly.
You're too busy burying gold in the back garden to worry about what's going on in aliens. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, yeah. Beginning to wish I'd never talked about gold on this podcast, but here we are.
Sorry, let's get back to serious conversation.
Right. So, okay. In the recent days, there's been some reports in the media about a report written by a former analyst from the Bank of England called Helen McCraw. Now, she, in 2024, and it's only just really kind of become to sort of public attention, but in 2024, she wrote a report essentially on what would the kind of societal effects of. And this is an important point. This is not a situation where it's Independence Day and there's a massive spaceship appears over London sort of situation. This is about a government preparing to disclose information that they are aware of alien extraterrestrial life, or what she refers to unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs. Apparently UFOs is no longer the accepted term.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So look, just get a bit of context on that. It's been in the media a little bit, this and that. Particularly the US government has intimated that it might be preparing to sort of share information about this kind of topic. And McCraw's report essentially says that the disclosure of such information about alien life, having, evidence of alien life on Earth, or the, visit, whatever you might call it, would be such a destabilizing event for the entire globe as to create essentially what is called an ontological shock, where, and I will quote here from the report, she describes an ontological shock as the state of overwhelm induced in us when a wholly unexpected fact or event forces us to question our conception of reality. So what has this got to do with money? And this is. I mean, she compares it to what's called the Copernican revolution, and this is when humanity finally came to the realization that the Earth was not the center of the universe, and that fundamentally upended a lot of things. Religions kind of, threw a lot of those kind of questions into the air and that sort of thing. I'm not that familiar with the details of Copernican revolution, but that's the kind of. Now, where this becomes interesting for us, because we're a money podcast, is McCraw has specific things to say about financial stability, because she is a financial stability expert, having worked at the Bank of England, albeit many years ago, I think she worked there. Essentially, her report posits that were some form of disclosure to take place, obviously there would be a massive destabilizing societal event. And we don't know what that might look like. We can guess at it. Along with such a destabilizing societal event would probably come the mother of all financial crises, basically, is what she says. With that in mind, she believes it is within the Bank of England's legal duty, effectively, to prepare for the existence of aliens, essentially. That is the thesis.
Okay.
So this is now what is open for discussion between you and I, Chris.
Right.
And I think we're going to look at this first off.
It's very serious. Come on, this could destabilize the entire financial system. Why are we laughing?
Look, I'm going to lay myself out on the line here, and I'm going to say that I think there is a non-zero chance of there being aliens out there in the universe.
I completely agree. Agree. But from a rational standpoint, which is it's so vast, it's so unknowable that there's the odds of there not being something, to me, seems a bit crazy.
Yeah, the odds of them being on planet Earth and being highly sentient, I would say, are somewhat longer, right?
Yeah, well, when I think of alien life, I think of sludge monsters on planet Zorb in a mad galaxy in another part of this kind of thing that can't. We're going to go on.
Sorry, we're going to look at this because aliens are such an important cultural phenomenon on planet Earth among many cultures, from the Nazca lines to kind of Roswell and whatever it might be. It's part of our cultural consciousness, and this is what makes it somewhat relevant. We're going to come to this a little bit later. But if we both establish that we think there is a non-zero risk, and it is the obligation of the Bank of England to prepare for massive destabilizing financial crises, therefore should the Bank of England prepare for aliens? The logic seems simple, right? What do you think?
Well, it depends where it is on the list. What other things are they preparing for? If that's number one on the list, I would say there's probably some more pressing issues, like massively uncertain geopolitical issues, which I'm sure they are taking into account. Thorough people, good at what they do, all that kind of good stuff. But if someone somewhere, and it sounds like this individual you mentioned is the person who this role fell to, you do have to think about all these risks, I suppose. I'd love to see the list of everything that they've thought about and actually get a sense of that, because maybe there's some other risks higher up the list that I would like to prepare for.
Okay, so she's actually written this report from the outside saying the Bank of England should be doing.
I see.
This.
Okay, right.
He wants the Bank of England to do something about it, to prepare for it. But I think it's interesting just exploring. Look, the Bank of England has some experience in dealing with major crises, and a lot of them do come out of clear blue air. COVID is a pretty good example of that.
Yeah, it's a good example.
I don't think anybody really saw that coming, and it created a massive destabilizing event. Although, that being said, people were pretty compliant with what governments said they had to do at the time. And actually, while a lot of markets fell precipitously, it all actually bounced up pretty extraordinarily after that fact. But yeah, the Bank of England has experience, right? COVID, we had the mini budget, was again much more low key.
Aliens. In comparison to the discovery of We're Not Alone in the Universe and the mini budget, I think
whether or not the mini budget was delivered by aliens is perhaps another question. However,
there was some strange non-terrestrial thinking.
You're right in the sense that there are black swans out there in the world, and the black swan is a black swan because we don't know when it hit us. And
so, what's a black swan for listeners? Sorry, let's not get this
a black swan event is a crisis event that nobody saw coming. It hits, and you weren't prepared for it, because how could you prepare? It's what's called an unknown unknown. right? So the thing about aliens is, as I said before, culturally speaking, it's kind of weirdly not an unknown. It's something that we are all familiar with because we digest literature about sci-fi and all this sort of stuff, movies from Hollywood. It's part of our cultural consciousness. So does that mean because it's a known unknown, no matter how infinitesimally small the probability of it happening, should we prepare for it? And I think that's quite interesting. Look, let's think about what would happen in the event. And obviously we're not kind of financial stability experts, but kind of off the top of my head, there are quite some interesting things to think about when imagine that we did have this kind of disclosure of the existence of aliens. I think it would potentially upend our entire financial system because the implications of what aliens would bring with them potentially could be extraordinary.
See, this is something that when you immediately thought about this subject, I was like, why? Why would someone telling me that, like I said, there's a sludge monster on Zorton 6 suddenly disrupt my entire the entire financial system and portfolio and mean that world markets are going to go through to turmoil? I think it does depend on
This
what that nature of that is.
It specifically depends on it's alien extraterrestrial presence on Earth rather than
right. Okay,
we've seen them out on a telescope somewhere in space and they're obviously there. That is not the same.
Right.
So their presence on Earth, and again, we're venturing to the realms of sci-fi here, but the implications are if there is an alien race, species, whatever you want to call them, out there that has advanced technology enough that they are able to travel millions of miles to come to Earth, what are the implications for technology? Do they have the kind of energy and propulsion technology that would immediately make a company like SpaceX worth nothing? Would it make the entire oil industry worth nothing because they have some sort of infinite energy, fusion technology or whatever it might be, that could make all of that irrelevant? Is there a defense contractor who were brought in by the US government or someone like that to look at the technology because their expertise would be needed? Could that make that US defense contractor suddenly the most valuable company in the world? The legal ramifications, the financial market ramifications, I think are pretty profound in that sense.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it's hard to disagree with that. But these are just sort of challenges. Like, wasn't AI like this though? That didn't come out of the blue, but I suppose it has created a surge.
Okay, but what if aliens have that kind of sentient AI that makes all our efforts to create AI here completely irrelevant as well? Like this is the whole point of the discussion. Is it is so fundamentally change our concept of science and technology and all this kind of stuff as to completely change all of the assumptions that make the global financial system what it is. Because look, even the point about energy, right? And this is something that, as somebody who I will admit, having watched things like Star Trek, and the joke among, I think, people on the left who you might be familiar with, Chris, is that
more than just Star Trek, if I'm honest.
Star Trek gets referred to as luxury space communism. And there's a really interesting reason why Star Trek gets referred to as luxury space communism. In this Star Trek universe, they have conquered the problem of energy. Energy is infinitely abundant. So when they're on their ships traveling around the galaxy and they want a cup of tea, they go to their little machine and they say, "Computer, give me a cup of tea," and it creates a cup of tea and it costs no energy to do that. If energy becomes without cost all of a sudden, it essentially devalues all of the assumptions underpinning a capitalist economy, because suddenly everything becomes potentially infinitely abundant. So this is pretty big.
Yes.
It would be pretty big, potentially.
Yeah, in that scenario.
Okay, in that scenario, right. Look,
I could definitely see that,
I'm labouring the point here, but the point is that it could be massively destabilizing for the financial markets.
Or if oil was suddenly pointless and an entire global industry and supply chain was changed, there would be a short-term shock around that, no doubt about it, and a reordering of stuff. I think that's fair to say. And we have seen sort of smaller events of that with COVID, as you mentioned. Suddenly healthcare vaccines become more value, or the race to get a vaccine, or the PPE. Famously, there were some examples of how that suddenly became like gold dust. But those are kind of short-lived and short-term, and then we return to how we're kind of doing things, which is slow or relatively steady progress with some notable exceptions, or it depends whether, well, it depends on your view, whether you think it's progress, but some people might think that we're regressing. But in terms of like, well, we're gradually sort of developing technologies, changing the way we live, and everyone can kind of look 3-5 years into the future and take a view on it. And you're saying if, alien lands here, says, I've got this amazing photon energy provider, you don't need any of that oil stuff, stop doing it, then all of a sudden there's an upending of that. But wouldn't that just suddenly be replaced in this scenario with this new energy source, provided they're willing to share it with us? And then all of a sudden there's a whole new industry that starts off around that. Again, isn't that the AI's taking my jobs argument?
Possibly, yeah. But you could see a situation where the entire market is selling out of one asset and trying to crowd into another. You could instantly devalue an enormous portion of the global economy and just create a whole series of overnight winners. It comes back to that kind of defense contractor thing, who's involved in these conversations, who's been party to it before it's been disclosed to the world.
Who has inside information, to use the parlance of the investment markets.
Correct. That inside information. How fair is it that they've been given that inside information? Who might have profited from that before actually telling anybody about that inside information? And that it throws up some interesting ethical dilemmas, I think, in that situation. And it gets a bit of that kind of conspiracy theory end of it, where it's kind of like who knew what when sort of stuff. But you don't know, and that's part of it. It's just part of blowing up all the kind of assumptions. And let's not forget, it would create panic, right? Would the Bank of England have to deal with instant bank runs as people were terrified?
Would it create panic? Is that, and we're talking more about alien discovery here than finance, but
I don't think people are going to be chill about it, Chris. I don't see a situation where
if they're coming with a new energy source that's going to replace oil, that's not going to destroy the globe, then I think I'm excited.
Does it not upend? It upends the notion of kind of all the major religions, that suddenly it completely changes assumptions about that kind of stuff on a cultural level.
Yeah. I mean, it probably does, but it might lead to more profound, deeper understanding of the universe around us. I feel like we have strayed off the topic of money somewhat, okay. But I think you're right. And so I suppose what I would ask is, who is it who's scenario planning this at the Bank of England, and what's the process and what's the plan?
So let's pull it back. This is, I think, quite interesting, because the Bank of England is duty bound to prepare for these kind of situations. Mm-hmm. I would say that duty probably doesn't go as far as trying to prepare for every single situation, because I think it would be partly, in some certain circumstances, redundant. Because, again, going back to that unknown unknowns thing, we don't know how the world's going to react, and we don't know what's going to happen in the world. All that we know is, do we have a plan for stabilizing markets were something destabilizing, alien or otherwise, to happen? I do think they have that responsibility to be prepared for.
So what could those other things be? Outbreak of war, huge natural disasters?
We've seen it, right? So huge natural disasters, and we can start straying into sci-fi with things like meteorites and things like that, right? But volcano eruptions, volcanic eruptions, a global conflict, nuclear disaster. But we've had some of these things happen. We've had nuclear disasters. We had Fukushima happened, although the damage was more limited, perhaps. Major global terror attacks, something we have experienced in this century. There are all sorts of things that we've already been through, and for the most part, markets have ultimately shrugged off. But again, to that unknown unknowns, who knows what could happen in the world? There is uncertainty and risk in everything, right? And it's judging that risk. And this is the next bit that I want to come on to, which I think is quite interesting. Because if you tell the Bank of England you have to prepare assiduously for every single risk out there, you actually spend a lot of time creating a system that tries to eliminate too much risk. You cotton ball everything. And actually, the financial system is predicated on taking risk, because without risk you don't get reward. That's a feature, not a fault of the financial system. De-risk everything, and actually some of the sort of quirkier ends of the financial discussion talk about things like bank deposit insurance being too much of a de-risk, because it means that you're basically underpinning the banking system to a degree that's unhealthy for the economy, because people leave their money inside low interest bearing accounts because it's quote unquote safe. So you have a situation where you can overly de-risk the economy because you're too scared of everything, right? And I think that's quite important as well, is not to create a situation where there is no risk and there is no reward because we're simply too scared of something that may or may not happen in the future. We do or don't know. And I think
it's stifling, isn't it? If around every corner there's something that's going to wipe us out, then you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning, right? You have to press on. The same goes for that as an institution. I suppose you have to categorize and prioritize those risks, but build into the system flexibility to respond to that. That's one thing I'd say that they probably don't have, as we've seen the way that Bank of England has been forced to respond to crises in the past, like the inflation shock, which is rates go up, rates go down. That's the tool available, right?
Yeah.
Is that enough levers to pull at? I don't know. Probably not.
Look, we can become quite existential about it, because actually I think preparing specifically for a disclosure about aliens, I think actually there would be an element of, well, potentially pointlessness in it, in the sense that it could be so disruptive to society that actually it doesn't matter, because it's just going to happen and there's nothing you can do about it.
And no one's going to read a press release from the Bank of England if they
say everybody calm down, because they're all going to be too busy in,
panicking.
I don't know. Yeah, panicking. Exactly. The Bank of England is the last thing on the list. But, again, that comes back to...
we'll look, listeners, don't worry, and we'll bring it to you in one of our podcasts from Planet Zog or wherever it is we are. But, yeah, sorry.
All right, Chris, bring the tone back a little bit, please. We're having a serious discussion here.
No, we are. Sorry, I got across it. Carry on.
So, and there is a phrase for this kind of event, actually, and it's called, and I throwing big words around here, it's called an epistemological rupture. And that is...
Okay, that sounds painful.
And it is something, again, it's kind of like an ontological, similar to ontological shock. It's just something that completely just upends your understanding of the universe, essentially. And I actually think it would be probably, institutions do things like wargaming, and they have game theory. Game theory is a big thing. They love game theory and wargaming, because you take a scenario, you play it out to its logical conclusions. I know it's quite popular with governments, particularly military, for obvious reasons. So I would wonder, it's probably worth a war game at the Bank of England and to see what it's like. Now, here's where I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on, Chris. What if they've already done it, but it's too top secret to tell us?
Wow, God! Release the alien invasion files. Is that our version of the other thing we keep talking about?
If a government were to have that kind of information, surely it wouldn't be a huge leap of logic for a government to look at that and say, this information is so dangerous that we actually can't tell anybody, because it would be too destabilizing.
So the Men in Black storyline.
Yeah. Look, that's where we're going with that. Is
no. I see the point. Sorry, Ed, I'm not being particularly helpful on this one, but no, I see the point. If the information, if people don't need to know, why would you tell them? Let them get on with their lives, kind of thing.
They would obviously, look, if we came back to that technological thing where, we were given some sort of God technology by our visitors that was going to change the world, then perhaps maybe you would try and set out some sort of pathway to publishing that to the world. Although there are also theories out there about things like microchips and stuff are alien technology that was given to us, and or like the plane that landed, the UFO that crashed in Roswell, they extracted the technology from that and they slowly feeding that into the global economy. That's where computers come from and that kind of stuff. Getting into proper wacky areas.
I think that was just a military base where they tested weird weaponry and then used the alien cover story to keep people from asking the proper questions. There's Okay, I'm not entirely sure that so the question I would have is, the alien that requires the cooperation of the hugely advanced alien life that have landed or who appeared on Earth to keep it quiet. Why wouldn't they want to tell us about them?
Again, this is a cultural trope.
And what are they invested in? That's what I'd like to know, because that's where the money is.
This is a cultural trope where if aliens do come to planet Earth, will they be friendly or will they not be friendly? Are they Independence Day aliens or are they Star Trek aliens? We might get one or the other kind of thing. We might get the nice ones kind of show. You find out kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, look, it's a sort of a ludicrous discussion. So I'm going to try and apply this in a way now that can have meaning in our day-to-day lives. And I think for me, what's interesting here is it's almost just like having a bit of a thought experiment about risk, right?
Yeah.
because alien disclosure is an extreme of the most extreme potential risk to us, our investments, the financial system, all that kind of stuff. What I do know, though, is that we have to take risks to get reward, like I said earlier. And I think it's good to reflect on what your risk tolerance is out there in the world. Do you feel like you need to be safer in government bonds or more adventurous with crypto, for instance? I think it's just worth thinking about more than anything else. And I think aliens is an eye-catching way of framing it, perhaps.
Yeah, it's the extreme end of this process. It's not it's not like you say, you work back from there and you work forward. Like there are some very real immediate existential risks to of conflict, of climate change, of things like that could fundamentally change the way the world operates, and technological breakthrough, like you said, that can ultimately change everything. It's like,
it's also a form of psychological, and I think it's called anchoring.
Okay.
Where you anchor an idea in somebody's head about such an extreme scenario that actually a bit of climate change and some geopolitical skullduggery is probably not the worst thing in the world. So it might be fine. Actually everything's fine because we're not being obliterated by UFOs.
I mean, that's a low bar.
UAPs.
That is a low bar, Ed. Everything's fine because the Independence Day aliens haven't blown us up yet. We can work further up the chain than that. But yeah, no, I hear what you're saying in terms of the thought experiment and working back from it. I do. And your own attitude to risk and where you think you're going to go with it. I think that's important. And lots of large organisations have to take this into account, right? Pension funds who invest a lot of our money, insurers, the people who insure the insurers have to calculate this on a daily basis. Like, these decisions are being made on everyday basis, and they dictate a lot of what returns we get on our pensions, what returns we get on our investments from our own retail investing point of view, but also insurance policies, right? That's what's happening there. Is they're gaming out what potentially could happen and taking a view, and where they think that is where the premium is, right? With a bit of profit on top. That's the entire way that's predicated.
Chris, if you find me an alien insurance policy, and we'll end the podcast. We'll just shut it down.
I wonder if Compare the Market or one of those guys has that. Well, ask them actually. We'll try and find out and see what
alien insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
If not, then
all right.
Maybe we could white label it. If any insurers want to start that, get in touch. I know a certain Mr. Greaves who'd be keen to buy it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wonder the premiums on that bad boy, penny a day. All right, I think that probably about wraps up. I'm very keen to hear from anybody who's got thoughts on this. Should the Bank of England be preparing for the arrival of aliens, etc.? Hopefully you've enjoyed this perhaps slightly light-hearted, thought-provoking discussion. With that, Chris, I'll bring things to a close. Thank you very much for being my foil as ever.
My pleasure. Anytime.
And thank you everybody for listening in. With that, I shall say goodbye. Thank you and goodbye.